Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Active Faces of History, the show where we back the layers of some of the most controversial, misunderstood, and legendary figures ever to shape our world. I'm your host, the Duke of New York, and today we're diving into the life of a man whose very name has become a shortcut for betrayal in America, Benedict Arnold. The title of today's episode says it all: Benedict Arnold, the bad and the ugly. We'll go deep into who he was before the betrayal, his childhood, his rise, his battles, his wounds, his ambition, and we'll expose what turned him from celebrated hero to the country's greatest villain. So pour yourself a drink, get comfortable, and join me as we uncover the good, the bad, and the very ugly truth behind Benedict Arnold. Part 1: The Child Behind the Traitor. Let's begin at the very start, long before the name Benedict Arnold dripped from American lips like poison, long before he was a byword for treachery in classrooms, cartoons, and angry whispers in Congress. He was first a child, a boy born into promise, fear, and tragedy, shaped by family honor and family ruin. Benedict Arnold V came into this world on January 14th, 1741, in the small colonial town of Norwich, Connecticut. The Arnolds were not nobodies, far from it. They were in fact a family of status, a name with deep colonial roots. His great-grandfather was one of the original founders of Rhode Island. Imagine that. A family that helped lay the first stones of New England. His father, Benedict Arnold IV, carried that legacy forward as a prosperous merchant and a respected ship's captain. He traded up and down the Atlantic, moving goods like rum, molasses, and West Indies sugar, the lifeblood of colonial commerce. In the eyes of Norwich society, the Arnolds were gentry, respectable, reliable, destined to climb even higher. But for young Benedict, life wasn't all smooth sailing. He was the second of 6 children, but by the time he reached his teenage years, only he and his sister Hannah were still alive. 4 of his siblings died in childhood, snatched away by yellow fever, that invisible killer that haunted every port town. These tragedies scarred the family deeply. They cracked something inside Benedict's father. Grief turned to drinking. Drinking turned to scandal. Norwich was a tight-knit, deeply Puritan settlement. Respectability was currency, and Benedict's father squandered it, drink by drink. When his father staggered home from the tavern, the town gossiped. When creditors came knocking at their door, the gossip turned to pity, then to ridicule. For a proud family that once walked tall among the town's elders, this fall from grace must have felt like a public execution by rumor. Picture young Benedict, a boy watching the world he knew. The polished name, the fine clothes, the solid house dissolve around him. Watching his mother, Hannah Waterman King Arnold, scramble to keep the family afloat while her husband drank away their future. Watching neighbors turn away in the street. By the age of 14, Benedict's world was no longer that of a merchant's son, but of a boy trying to outrun the stink of disgrace. Norwich society did not forgive easily, and if you know anything about human nature, you know that shame can forge an iron will, or break a person entirely. In Benedict, it did the first. The collapse of his father's reputation gave young Benedict an obsession: honor. He would spend the rest of his life clawing back the respect that his father lost. Everything he did, the risks, the battles, the charges into enemy fire, all of it was driven by that same burning need: never to be humiliated, never to be looked down upon, never to be pitied. With his father ruined and the family nearly bankrupt, Benedict's mother looked for a lifeline. She arranged for Benedict to be apprenticed to her cousins, the Lathrops, who ran an apothecary in Norwich. It was a respectable trade. Back then, an apothecary was more than a simple pharmacy. It was the first line of defense against sickness, the source for everything from herbs to tonics to basic surgery. Young Benedict learned how to measure out powders, mix tinctures, and keep the books. But you can almost feel it, can't you? The restlessness, the spark under the skin. Benedict hated the slow, measured life behind the counter. He wasn't made to stand still, to watch pennies drip into the till. He wanted to command ships, explore new ports, duel rivals, test his nerve on bigger stages. At 16, that restless spark nearly caught fire. He ran away, tried to enlist in the colonial militia during the French and Indian War, eager to earn a name in battle. But his mother, fiercely protective of her only surviving son, dragged him home before he saw action. But the itch never left. When Benedict turned 21, he broke free of the apothecary life for good. He moved to New Haven, Connecticut, then a bustling seaport with Harvard men, Yale scholars, merchants, and sailors brushing shoulders on muddy streets. There, Benedict opened his own general store, invested in ships, and began trading goods across the West Indies. He bought and sold sugar, rum, tea, and yes, some of it smuggled. He dodged British customs duties, just like many colonial merchants did. Smuggling wasn't just rebellion, it was survival. The Crown's trade restrictions and taxes were suffocating New England's merchants. Arnold, always quick to defend his rights and reputation, made enemies fast. He sued rivals for slander, fought duels when he felt insulted, and built a reputation as a fiery young trader who would not be wronged. For all his fights, he cared deeply for his family. He supported his beloved sister Hannah, who managed his household and stayed loyal through every scandal that would come. He cared for his mother as she battled illness, and for his father as he died, broken, disgraced, and nearly penniless. By the mid-1760s, Benedict Arnold had done the impossible. He had pulled his family name back from the brink. He was prosperous, respected by his crew, feared by his enemies. He wore fine clothes, rode fine horses, lived in a fine house. Respect, the thing he craved most, seemed finally within reach. But this hunger for respect, this obsession with honor, was a double-edged sword. It made him a hero, but it would also make him the villain of his own story. So, here is the child behind the traitor, a boy marked by loss, driven by shame, hungry for glory, and desperate never to be humiliated again. The fire that burned in young Benedict Arnold, that fire built ships, made him rich, and later would carry him up icy rivers and through British lines at Saratoga. But it would also drive him to do the unthinkable when that same respect was denied. In the next part of our story, we'll see how this restless boy turned himself into the Revolution's brightest and most impossible star. The brilliant general, the fearless commander, the man who won battles America could not afford to lose. Stay with me. When we left young Benedict Arnold, he had clawed his way out of family ruin, a boy forged by disgrace, driven by loss, obsessed with restoring the honor his father lost at the bottom of a bottle. But the story was only beginning, because for Benedict, pulling himself up was never enough. He needed to rise higher than everyone else. This next chapter, A Young Man with Something to Prove, is where that fire turned into real ambition. And that ambition, once unleashed, would make him both a hero and a ticking time bomb. By the time Arnold was in his early 20s, he'd shaken off his father's failures and built a name of his own in New Haven, Connecticut. He didn't inherit wealth. He earned it. He opened a general store on the busy streets near Yale College, where students, merchants, and sailors all crossed paths. But Benedict wasn't just a shopkeeper. He was a maritime trader, a ship owner who knew the West Indies trade routes well. His sloops and brigs carried rum, molasses, sugar, and goods both legal and smuggled. And let's be honest, smuggling was no crime in the eyes of most colonial merchants. Britain's taxes and navigation acts were seen as unjust, and Arnold, ever the hothead, saw no problem bending the rules to turn a profit. If a customs agent seized one of his ships, he'd sue. If an official questioned his honor, he'd challenge them to a duel. There's one story that sums him up perfectly. When a British tax collector boarded one of Arnold's ships and tried to confiscate it for unpaid duties, Arnold physically attacked him, then paid the resulting fine rather than apologize. Even then, Benedict would not bow to any man. His fierce temper, sharp business sense, and unbending pride made him powerful and dangerous. Rival merchants feared him, customers respected him, and even friends knew to tread carefully when challenging his reputation. He was generous to his sister Hannah, who managed his household. He was known to help neighbors in need, but if you crossed him, expect trouble. And through it all, he lived large. He rode the best horses. He wore tailored coats from London. He dined in style, drank the finest rum he sold. Benedict Arnold believed success was best displayed. Wealth, like honor, had to be visible for people to respect it. Then, in 1767, he married Margaret Mansfield, the daughter of a respected New Haven sheriff. It was a good match, respectable, stable, a sign that Arnold was part of the town's rising class. Together they had 3 sons, and for a brief moment, Benedict seemed to have it all: the successful business, the respectable marriage, the children to carry on the Arnold name. But life didn't stay kind for long. In 1775, Margaret died young, leaving Benedict a widower with 3 boys. Losing Margaret was another scar, another reminder of how quickly fortune turned. For a man so obsessed with honor and family, her death must have felt like fate's cruel joke. Yet even grief couldn't stop his restless drive. Arnold threw himself deeper into business. He expanded his fleet, made more enemies, and kept proving, to the world and himself, that the Arnold name would not be forgotten or ridiculed again. But this was colonial America. The 1760s were simmering with tension. Taxes from London, the hated Stamp Act, soldiers quartered in colonial homes, merchants squeezed by new duties and red tape. Men like Benedict Arnold were exactly the type to push back. When mobs rose up to tar and feather tax collectors, when merchants met in secret to boycott British goods, Arnold was right there, lending ships, funding protests, joining committees. Not because he was an idealist, but because British power was another insult to men like him, men who saw themselves as self-made, self-ruled, and answerable to no one. So, when word came in April 1775 that shots had been fired at Lexington and Concord, the fuse inside Benedict Arnold was already lit. He was captain of the local militia, a company he'd helped fund himself. He stormed into New Haven's town hall and demanded the keys to the powder house. When the town leaders hesitated, Arnold threatened to break down the doors with his men. He didn't wait for permission. He took action. He marched his militia north to Boston on his own dime, armed with his own weapons, uniforms, and sheer will. Here was a man who'd never stand in line, never beg for orders. He'd make himself indispensable to the cause, and that's exactly what he did. One of his first moves was bold enough to get him noticed by the highest ranks. He proposed seizing Fort Ticonderoga, a British outpost guarding the valuable cannons the fledgling Continental Army desperately needed. Arnold rushed north with his men, met up with Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, and despite mutual distrust and clashing egos, they captured the fort without a single shot fired. It was one of the first American victories of the Revolution, and it had Benedict Arnold's audacity written all over it. But even in victory, his flaws showed. Arnold fought with Allen over who deserved the credit. He demanded Congress reimburse him, to the last penny, for every ounce of powder, every boot, every meal he'd paid for out of pocket. And when recognition didn't come fast enough, his resentment simmered. This is where the pattern began. Fight heroically, spend his own money, expect praise, and when slighted, feel betrayed. It wouldn't take long before that pride turned into something more dangerous. But in 1775 and 1776, all that lay ahead. For now, Benedict Arnold was exactly where he wanted to be. A young man with something to prove, standing on the edge of greatness and ruin, ready to risk everything to reclaim a name once dragged through the mud. When we think about Benedict Arnold today, we jump straight to the betrayal. But before he turned traitor, he was exactly the man America needed. Daring, tireless, brilliant under fire. In this part of our story, the revolutionary hero, we meet Benedict Arnold at the peak of his courage and cunning, when his ambition lifted a fledgling rebellion onto its feet. After the bold capture of Fort Ticonderoga in May 1775, Arnold proved he wasn't just a loud voice with a short fuse. He was a man who got things done. He saw what others didn't and acted while others hesitated. The victory at Ticonderoga gave the Continental Army desperately needed artillery. Those heavy cannons, dragged by Henry Knox over snowy trails and frozen rivers, would later force the British to abandon Boston altogether. Arnold's bold move set that chain in motion, but he didn't stick around to soak up the praise. He was already looking for the next audacious gamble. Later that same year, Arnold proposed one of the most daring campaigns of the entire war, an assault on Quebec City, the British stronghold in Canada. His plan? March an army through the unforgiving wilderness of Maine, cross rivers and mountains in the dead of winter, and take Quebec by surprise. It was borderline madness, and exactly the kind of desperate stroke the American cause needed. Congress approved a dual attack. One force under Richard Montgomery would come up from the south, while Arnold would lead his men through the wilderness from the west. If they could capture Quebec, they might bring the entire province into the Revolution. The march became legendary for its suffering and sheer grit. Arnold led about 1,100 men. Many were young, poor, and ill-prepared for the brutal trek ahead. They carried supplies in leaky bateaux that sank or split open in icy rivers. Storms turned the forests to swamps and the trails to treacherous bogs. Food ran out. Men slaughtered dogs, boiled shoes, and ate bark to survive. By the time Arnold's ragged column staggered out of the forests in November 1775, nearly half his force was dead or deserted. But they made it, frostbitten, starved, and still determined. Benedict Arnold pushed them forward to the gates of Quebec. On New Year's Eve, 1775, Arnold and Montgomery launched their attack. The plan was chaos from the start. Snow lashed their faces, muskets misfired in the wet cold, and British defenders waited behind stone walls. Montgomery was killed instantly by grape shot. Arnold, refusing to retreat, led his men through narrow, freezing streets until a bullet smashed into his left leg, shattering the bone and nearly killing him. He was carried out on a makeshift stretcher, yelling orders even as he bled onto the frozen ground. The attack failed. Quebec held. But the legend of Benedict Arnold, the fearless commander, was born. Washington, hearing about the campaign's bravery despite its failure, promoted him to brigadier general. His men adored him. They knew he bled alongside them, risked his life at their side. While recovering from his wound, Arnold was restless as ever. In 1776, he took charge of building a makeshift fleet on Lake Champlain, a bold bid to stop the British from sweeping down from Canada. Using raw timber and raw recruits, Arnold oversaw the construction of a tiny, ragtag squadron. At the Battle of Valcour Island, Arnold's flotilla faced a far superior British navy. Outgunned and outmanned, he managed to delay the British advance long enough to force them to winter in Canada instead of marching south. Some historians argue this daring naval stand saved the northern colonies for another year, giving the Revolution precious breathing room to regroup. But Arnold's greatest moment came in 1777 at Saratoga. The British planned to cut New England off from the rest of the colonies by controlling the Hudson River corridor. General John Burgoyne's grand invasion from Canada threatened to slice the rebellion in two. The American defense fell to General Horatio Gates, a cautious, political man who distrusted Arnold's reckless bravery. As second in command, Arnold pushed for aggressive action. Gates wanted to dig in and wait. Arnold, furious at being sidelined, defied orders and charged into the thick of battle anyway. He led repeated attacks, rallying broken lines, personally directing charges. His horse was shot out from under him. He was shot again in the same wounded leg, the one nearly lost at Quebec. This time, the bullet shattered bone and left him with a lifelong limp. But Arnold's audacity turned the tide. His leadership at Bemis Heights forced Burgoyne's surrender. The victory at Saratoga changed everything. It convinced France to openly join the American cause, bringing money, soldiers, and ships that turned a colonial rebellion into a global war Britain could not easily win. Yet, incredibly, Arnold's heroics at Saratoga didn't bring him the glory he expected. Gates claimed the victory for himself, downplayed Arnold's role, and fed Congress his version of events. Arnold, confined to bed, recovering from his shattered leg, seethed with resentment as Gates took the credit that might have made Arnold a national hero. So here he was, Benedict Arnold, the man who gave his own money for the cause, bled for it on frozen fields and muddy riverbanks, a man whose name should have been celebrated alongside Washington's, instead insulted, overlooked, and forced to defend his honor from jealous rivals and calculating politicians. Even Washington recognized Arnold's worth. He admired Arnold's fearlessness and daring and often defended him. But Washington was also under pressure from Congress, and Congress distrusted Arnold's high spending, his temper, and his habit of ignoring protocol. Behind the legend of the revolutionary hero, the seeds of betrayal were quietly sprouting, because here's the contradiction. Benedict Arnold needed recognition as badly as he needed air. He believed he deserved it, and when it didn't come, bitterness took root where loyalty once lived. At Saratoga, he cemented his place as America's most brilliant battlefield commander. But instead of medals and honors, he found himself entangled in petty rivalries, court-martial threats, and political smears. In the next chapter, we'll watch how the hero, wounded, humiliated, and increasingly bitter, started listening to darker whispers. We'll see how the man who fought so fiercely for independence began to wonder if he'd backed the wrong side. Stay with me. When we left Benedict Arnold, he was the fearless hero of Saratoga, the battlefield commander who took bullet after bullet for the young American cause. He bled for independence, pushed his men beyond their limits, and turned what could have been defeat into the Revolution's first truly decisive victory. But here's the great twist. The same daring spirit that made Arnold a hero also made him impossible to control. And in a new nation where politics, jealousy, and fragile egos ruled Congress, that was a recipe for disaster. This is where Benedict Arnold's greatest strength, his brilliance as a general, collided with his greatest weakness, his towering pride and hair-trigger temper. After Saratoga, Arnold's battered. His left leg, already shattered by a musket ball at Quebec, was hit again, this time splintering bone and nearly killing him with infection. He walked with a cane for the rest of his life, the leg 2 inches shorter than the other, the bones barely holding together. To most men, that kind of wound would have been a reason to retire with honor. But not Arnold. For him, stepping away meant stepping aside, letting enemies write the story while he sat forgotten in bandages. He wouldn't have it. While convalescing, Arnold's name should have been on everyone's lips, toasted in taverns, honored by Congress. But instead, politics swirled like poison around his hospital bed. General Horatio Gates, the cautious commander who'd clashed with Arnold over battle tactics, claimed full credit for Saratoga. He wrote glowing reports about himself and barely mentioned the man whose battlefield charge forced Burgoyne's surrender. Gates cultivated allies in Congress who disliked Arnold's brash style and saw him as reckless, maybe even dangerous.
It wasn't just Gates.
Other officers resented Arnold's larger-than-life presence and his sense of entitlement. Arnold expected to be repaid for spending his own money to supply his men. He expected a higher rank, medals, public praise. That rubbed many the wrong way. And so, instead of a hero's welcome, Arnold found himself the target of whispers, investigations, and petty political games. In 1777, Congress drew up new seniority lists for its generals, and despite his sacrifices, Arnold was leapfrogged by 5 junior officers who'd seen far less action than he had. It was a blatant insult, the kind that hit Arnold right where he was weakest, his pride. Washington, ever the steady hand, tried to calm him. He wrote to Congress, urging them to recognize Arnold's contributions. Privately, Washington respected Arnold's courage. He knew this firebrand was trouble, but also knew he couldn't afford to lose him. Eventually, Congress reinstated Arnold's seniority, but the damage was done. For Arnold, it was proof that the very government he'd risked his life for was run by small men who cared more about petty jealousies than winning a war. And then there was the matter of money. Arnold's finances were a mess. He'd funded soldiers out of pocket, borrowed heavily to equip them, and expected reimbursement. But Congress was broke and suspicious. They accused him of submitting inflated claims. To Benedict Arnold, this was another slap in the face. He'd saved entire campaigns, lost ships and men for the cause, and now he was treated like a common swindler. He fought back, demanding repayments in letters that dripped with scorn and frustration. In March 1778, after months of recovery, Arnold was finally fit enough to return to duty. Washington, knowing Arnold couldn't handle inactivity and gossip swirling around him, gave him command of Philadelphia, newly recaptured after the British evacuation. This should have been a fresh start, a powerful military post, close to the seat of Congress. But instead, Philadelphia became the trap that would doom him. Philadelphia in 1778 was a city in turmoil. The British had held it for almost a year, and when they left behind a stew of divided loyalties, empty coffers, and opportunists eager to get rich. Arnold, always drawn to the finer things, fell right into its lavish social scene. He moved into a grand house once occupied by the British commander. He threw lavish parties, rode in a fancy carriage, dressed in the finest uniforms. To the city's patriot leaders, especially the radical Pennsylvania Assembly, this looked like corruption, plain and simple. Then came Peggy Shippen. Peggy was 18, beautiful, sophisticated, the daughter of a prominent Philadelphia family with deep, loyalist ties. The Shippens had dined with British generals during the occupation. Peggy was charming and clever, and soon Benedict Arnold fell hard. Their marriage in April 1779 should have been the high point of his new life. Instead, it became the match that lit the fuse. Arnold's spending skyrocketed. His enemies, the radical patriots of Pennsylvania, accused him of using public wagons for private goods, closing shops for personal profit, and abusing his power. Arnold's temper didn't help. He threatened lawsuits, demanded apologies, and fought every slight like a duel. His growing debts, combined with his new wife's taste for luxury, pushed him deeper into financial quicksand. When the Pennsylvania Council brought formal charges of corruption and misuse of power, Arnold demanded a court-martial. Sure, he'd be cleared and vindicated. But while Washington stayed loyal, Congress found him guilty on 2 minor counts, enough to humiliate him publicly and tarnish his pride once more. So here we have him, Benedict Arnold, the brilliant general now stuck behind a desk, limping through lavish halls in Philadelphia, married to a loyalist daughter, loathed by radical patriots, bleeding money, and feeling deeply betrayed by the very revolution he helped keep alive. It's no wonder he began to ask himself a dangerous question. Was this fight really worth it? And when a certain British spymaster named John Andre came calling through secret letters, promising gold, a title, and respect that the Americans denied him, Benedict Arnold's mind was ready to listen. In the next part of our story, we'll step into the shadows as Benedict Arnold, the hero who once stormed the gates of Quebec and turned the tide at Saratoga, now plots to hand over the key to America's survival, West Point. Stay with me. Part 5, The Act of Treason. So far, we've seen Benedict Arnold rise from a ruined family name to the heights of battlefield glory. We've watched him bleed, charge, and win battles other men thought unwinnable. But all that glory came at a price: debts, political enemies, endless public slights. By 1779, Arnold's pride was bruised beyond repair. His wounded leg never healed. His debts multiplied. His new bride, Peggy Shippen, opened his eyes to a different path. Peggy wasn't just a socialite. She'd moved comfortably in British circles during the occupation of Philadelphia. She knew officers. She knew who to contact. And she knew how to pass messages. When Arnold looked at the revolution by now, he didn't see freedom. He saw a cause that had used him up and spit him out. And in that bitterness, the British found their perfect inside man. Arnold's contact was Major John Andre, a dashing, intelligent British officer who ran the Crown's secret intelligence network in the colonies. Through Peggy's connections and coded letters written in invisible ink, Arnold and Andre began to negotiate. Arnold's offer was shocking and strategic. He would deliver to the British the most vital American stronghold, West Point, New York. Why West Point? Well, this wasn't just any fort. It controlled the Hudson River, the lifeline of the rebellion. Whoever controlled West Point could cut the colonies in two. If the British took it, they could isolate New England, the beating heart of the Patriot cause, from the middle and southern colonies. Arnold knew this, and he knew West Point's weaknesses better than anyone. In August 1780, he convinced Washington to give him command of the entire fort and its garrison. Washington agreed. Arnold's limp and legendary reputation made him the perfect man to hold the Hudson Highlands. Little did Washington know he'd just handed the keys to his closest fortress to his most brilliant traitor. Arnold's plan was simple in theory, but treacherous in practice. He would weaken West Point's defenses, scatter supplies, neglect repairs, disperse the garrison, and then at the right moment hand it over to a British force sailing upriver under General Sir Henry Clinton. In exchange, Arnold wanted money, a lot of money. He demanded over 20,000 pounds sterling, a fortune in the 18th century. He also wanted a general's commission in the British Army. Honor, respect, security, everything the Americans refused him, the British promised. For months, coded messages crisscrossed enemy lines hidden in shoe soles and inside hollow quills. Peggy Shippen, the socialite turned co-conspirator, kept the flow going. Arnold played the role of trusted American commander by day, secret traitor by candlelight. Then came the fateful meeting, the one that turned whispered plots into outright treason. In September 1780, Major Andre sailed up the Hudson under a flag of truce to meet Arnold face to face. They spoke on the banks of the river. Then Andre hid the plans for West Point's fortifications in his boot. But fate has a sense of irony. As Andre tried to slip back to British lines disguised in civilian clothes, he was stopped by American militiamen near Tarrytown, New York. They found the hidden papers in his boot, clear evidence of the plot. Word raced up the Hudson faster than any British sloop. Major Andre was hauled before American officers, including Alexander Hamilton, and when the news reached Washington, he was stunned. He was on his way to visit Arnold at West Point when he learned of the betrayal. Washington arrived at Arnold's headquarters to find his trusted general gone. Arnold had slipped out just minutes before, riding hard for the safety of a British ship anchored downriver. Major Andre wasn't so lucky. He faced a court-martial where he bravely admitted his role but begged not to be hanged as a spy. But under the laws of war, he was exactly that, a spy caught in disguise with enemy plans hidden in his boot. Despite pleas from the British and even some American officers, Andre was executed by hanging in October 1780, his death mourned by both sides as the tragic gentleman of the plot. And what of Benedict Arnold? He slipped onto the British sloop Vulture, fitting name if you ask me, and sailed away to become a brigadier general in the British Army. He was paid some of what he was promised, but never all of it. Many British officers distrusted him. After all, if he betrayed his country once, why wouldn't he betray them too? Back in America, his name became poison overnight. Children were taught that Benedict Arnold meant traitor. His face was burned in effigy. His family was torn apart. Peggy stayed loyal, but many of his old friends turned away in disgust. The man who once stormed Quebec, who rallied broken lines at Saratoga, who gave his fortune to feed starving soldiers, all of it erased by one act that redefined him forever. He thought he'd get wealth, a title, and a comfortable life in Britain, but instead he got suspicion and contempt. His own story was now out of his hands. He'd written his name into history's darkest corner. So here's the truth. Treason is never simple. It's easy to say Benedict Arnold was greedy, and he was. It's easy to say he was vain, and he was that too. But behind his betrayal was a mountain of slights, debts, enemies, and a lifetime spent proving himself to a world that never seemed to give him his due. A man who gave everything to a cause, and when the cause turned its back, he gave it away for gold. In the final part of this story, we'll see what became of Benedict Arnold after the ink dried on his betrayal, his desperate bid for a legacy, his lonely death in London, and the ghost of his name that still haunts American history books today. Stay with me. When Benedict Arnold stepped onto that British warship in 1780, he didn't just flee an American fort. He fled his country, his friends, his reputation, and any chance at redemption. From that moment on, he was a man in exile, a general without a nation, a hero turned pariah, a cautionary tale whose name would echo down American history as a synonym for betrayal. But what did exile look like for Benedict Arnold? Was it luxury and respect? Or was it a lonely road paved with bitterness, half-earned promises, and a legacy that rotted away the glory he'd once fought so desperately to build? Let's find out. When Arnold arrived behind British lines, he was greeted like a prize for about 5 minutes. He had delivered secrets that could have shattered the American Revolution. But with Major John Andre dead and the plot exposed, the British gained little from it in the end. They paid Arnold roughly £6,000 in upfront cash, far less than the £20,000 he'd negotiated. They gave him a brigadier general's commission in the British Army. But what they couldn't give him, and what he craved most, was trust and respect. To the British High Command, Arnold was useful but toxic. Loyalist officers viewed him as a man who had betrayed his own brothers in arms for a bag of gold. Many asked themselves, if he could betray Washington, what would stop him from selling out the king if things went badly? Arnold, ever the proud soldier, thought he'd lead British armies into great battles. Instead, he was given backwater assignments and raids that most senior officers didn't want. He launched a few raids into Virginia and Connecticut, ironically burning towns in the same colonies where he'd once fought for freedom. These raids made him even more despised by his former countrymen, but they did little to advance Britain's war aims. As the revolution drew to a close and Britain's defeat became certain, Arnold's usefulness shrank to nothing. In 1781, he sailed for London with Peggy and their children, hoping to be welcomed into British high society as a celebrated, loyal servant of the crown. But London society didn't want him. He found some success at first. The king granted him a modest pension, and Peggy, clever and charming as ever, secured him invitations to elite gatherings. But doors closed quickly when Benedict entered the room. British gentlemen whispered behind his back. Titled officers refused to shake his hand. To them, he wasn't a hero. He was the man who'd turned his sword on his own flag. Desperate to restore his reputation and rebuild his fortune, Arnold threw himself back into business, the only arena where he'd always thrived. He partnered with his sons and tried to re-enter the shipping trade. He invested in land in Canada. He even briefly returned to New Brunswick, hoping to build a new life there. But again and again, he ran into lawsuits, bankruptcies, and enemies old and new who distrusted every deal he made. He quarreled with partners, threatened duels over insults, and filed endless court claims. The same pride that fueled his rise and betrayal still burned, but now it had no battlefield to unleash itself on. As his health failed, Arnold was haunted by what he'd lost. He knew how Americans cursed his name. He knew the British saw him as a convenient traitor, useful for propaganda, but not worth true honor. The cause he betrayed never welcomed him back. The cause he embraced never fully trusted him. He spent his final years in a rented London townhouse walking with a cane, the same leg that bled at Quebec and Saratoga, still a constant source of pain. In 1801, at the age of 60, Benedict Arnold died, broken, embittered, and largely forgotten by the world he'd once set ablaze with his ambition. Legend says that on his deathbed, Arnold looked at the faded uniform of his old Continental Army coat, the blue and buff of a general who once bled for liberty, and whispered, "Let me die in this old uniform in which I fought my battles. May God forgive me for ever putting on another." True or not, the story captures the tragedy of the man, a soldier who may have regretted that the cause he fought so fiercely for slipped through his fingers, and that his own pride made him choose infamy over obscurity. Today, his name lives on, but not for his heroics at Quebec or his reckless bravery at Saratoga. His name survives as an insult, a slur, a lesson. To call someone a Benedict Arnold is to call them a traitor of the worst kind. But is it really that simple? Was he purely evil, a cold-hearted villain who betrayed his country for cash? Or was he a man broken by the very revolution he helped win, undone by politics, envy, wounds, debts, and a deep hunger for recognition that was never fully fed? In many ways, Benedict Arnold is a uniquely American paradox. He was the revolution's greatest battlefield genius and its greatest scandal. Without him, the early victories that saved the rebellion might never have happened. But with him, the young nation faced its first lesson in how fragile loyalty can be. His story forces us to look deeper at the fine line between hero and villain, how the same ambition that builds nations can also bring them to the brink of ruin. So here we are at the end of Benedict Arnold's storm-tossed story. We've met him as the ambitious boy trying to scrub away his father's disgrace. We've marched with him through frozen rivers and howling forests to Quebec. We've watched him take bullets to the bone for a cause that didn't always love him back. And we've seen him betray that same cause for gold, rank, and the fragile promise of respect. But when the final musket fired and the last letter was smuggled through enemy lines, who was Benedict Arnold? Really? Was he the snake of American legend? Or was he, as some argue, the revolution's most tragic, complicated man, hero and villain in one battered body? Historians still wrestle with him because Benedict Arnold forces us to face the uncomfortable truth that people can't be neatly boxed up as good or evil. His battlefield brilliance was undeniable. Without Arnold, there's a strong chance the colonies would have lost key early campaigns. Fort Ticonderoga, Quebec, Valcour Island, Saratoga, these weren't flukes. They were moments when he made bold choices others wouldn't dare. His men idolized him. They didn't see the reckless traitor of textbooks. They saw the general who ate their meager rations, crossed icy rivers by their side, and stood at the front when the cannons roared. To them, Arnold was the living, breathing revolution. Stubborn, fearless, hungry for more. Yet that same hunger was a double-edged sword. He wanted recognition so badly that, when it was withheld, by jealous rivals, petty politicians, or simply by the chaos of war, it curdled into resentment. He wanted status so badly that he spent money he didn't have. He wanted respect so badly that he traded his country for the promise of it. So ask yourself, was he purely greedy? Or was he human in a way that makes us uncomfortable to admit? One historian described Arnold as the best fighting general George Washington ever had. Washington himself never fully turned on him. Even after the betrayal, some letters show Washington grieved the loss of the man, not just the treason. He knew how much the army had relied on Arnold's nerve and daring when victory seemed impossible. When you think about it, the real tragedy of Benedict Arnold is that he was America in miniature. Bold, defiant, hungry to rise above a humble start. He bristled under a distant, unfeeling government. He resented taxes and unfair treatment. He believed his honor mattered more than anything. Sound familiar? But where the nation doubled down and kept the fight alive, Arnold turned his back. Maybe he didn't see a country worth saving. Or maybe he couldn't stomach the idea that he would never get the thanks he believed he deserved. And what about his family? His wife Peggy remains a ghost in this story. A charming hostess, yes, but also a shrewd player. Did she fan the flames? Did she push him toward the British? Or was she simply the mirror for what Arnold already wanted, a life that promised him the status he'd never win from Congress? After his death, Peggy returned to high society in London. She lived comfortably until her own passing, always defending her husband's name, always spinning his legacy as misunderstood, the victim of a country that used him and then betrayed him first. So, where does that leave us today? Benedict Arnold's name is still shorthand for traitor in the American lexicon. Kids grow up learning his name, not for the daring raids or frozen marches, but for the plot to sell out West Point. Streets named for him were renamed. Monuments to his battles left his name off the plaques. At Saratoga, you can visit a lone boot-shaped monument. It marks where Arnold was shot, but it never says his name. His courage is carved in stone, but the man is erased. And maybe that's the final irony. The same man who wanted immortality through glory did get it, but not in the form he imagined. He's immortal because we can't stop arguing about him. He's the living proof that one man can be both hero and villain in the same breath. When you peel back the layers, Benedict Arnold is more than just a cautionary tale. He's a mirror for ambition, for loyalty, for the lines we draw when we decide who deserves praise and who deserves punishment. His story asks us to think hard about how we remember people. Do we let their worst act erase their best, or do we accept that human beings are more complicated than that? Was Benedict Arnold purely evil? No. Was he wrong? Absolutely. But was he just like us, hungry for approval, proud, flawed, and desperate not to be forgotten? I'd say yes. And that's what makes his story worth telling, even now. So listeners, as we close the pages on Benedict Arnold tonight, I leave you with the question. Was he a traitor, a hero, or simply too human for any clean label? Tell me what you think. Comment below, share this story, argue about it with your friends, because if Benedict Arnold left us anything, it's this: a name we can't stop wrestling with. This has been Faces of History. I'm the Duke of New York. If you enjoyed this dive into the messy, brilliant, treacherous mind of Benedict Arnold, hit that follow button, leave a review, and tell me who you want to peel back next. Until then, keep questioning, keep digging, and never stop asking why.